All right, folks. Pleasure to be here again. You know, unless you're living under a rock, you are familiar with what's been going on in the world. We have war in the Ukraine. We have the possible threat of something that we've never seen in this world, and that is nuclear war. We have skirmishes happening all over the world. We have protests and we have fighting, and there's just a lot of madness that is going on in the world. And one of the things that I notice is that many of my non-Christian friends are struggling with anxiety because of what is going on around them. And many of my non-Christian friends don't quite know how to handle all of the stresses of the world and of the time that we're living in. And so, what I try to tell them is that, you know, one of the reasons why I'm a Christian amongst many is because I have this peace that passes understanding. I have this hope that everything's going to be okay. And they say, well, how do you know? And I tell them, because I have a book and I read this book, and this is the Bible, and I skip to the end. Whenever I feel upset, whenever I feel worried, whenever I feel concerned about the way that things are going, whether it's in my life or the world at large, I will refer to this book and skip to the end. Now, there's something very interesting. Um, Most people would find it very wrong to skip to the end of the book. And in fact, I read an article about this author who had a friend who confessed to her that when she reads a book, she actually, before she gets into the book, she skips to the end of the book and she reads the last few pages. And the author of the article was just incredulous, couldn't believe what they were hearing. What do you mean? How could you skip to the end of the book? You're definitely spoiling the whole thing. You're not enjoying the journey of finding out what's going to happen next, and the mystery and the surprise and all this stuff, because you know how it ends. Like, what's the point of reading the book? It just seemed almost sacrilegious to her that her friend, who was a very avid and voracious reader, would do something so horrible as read the end of the book. But the friend of this author explained it this way. She said, when I skip to the end of the book and I know how it ends and I know what's going to happen to the characters, then I can read with more peace and I can enjoy the experience. I can enjoy the journey, because I know that even though there may be some bumpy times and there may be some difficult moments in the experience of the characters in this book, that at a certain point, everything's going to be okay. And there was a survey or a study that was done, and they had a bunch of people read a book, and they had one group of people not skip to the end, and they had another group of people skip to the end of the book, read it, and then go back and read the book in its entirety. What they found was that the people who skipped to the end of the book and read the ending first, by a large margin, enjoyed the book far better than those who had not. What they found was that people who had skipped to the end enjoyed the experience, the journey. They enjoyed everything about the book far more than people who had not skipped to the end. And what they began to realize was that skipping to the end of the book gave these people a certain amount of peace, so they could sit back now and enjoy the book, and everything's going to be okay, and they're going to experience it and have fun just going along the journey. But there's a certain level of peace in knowing how the story is going to end. And so when I talk to my friends who are non-Christians, and I tell them, you know I derive my peace from this book, and they don't understand, I tell them I skip to the end. So because I skip to the end, as I'm going on this journey called life, whether there's some ups or some downs, whether I experience difficulties or whatever it may be, ultimately I have peace. And they say, why? And so what I do is I skip to the end. So I skipped all the way to the end, to the last book of this book called the Bible, to one of the last chapters, chapter 21, and I read them this passage. And it says, and after all things are said and done, says, and I saw in verse 21 a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I had a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men and will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And listen to this. It says, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Wouldn't that be nice? And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. No more aches and pains, no more achy knees, no more arthritis, no more strained backs, none of that. There will be no more pain, physical, emotional, or in any way, because it says that God shall wipe away the tears from our eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. When I skip to the end of this book, it tells me that my God wins. And it tells me that if I'm holding on to him in faith, that I will win too. And one day he will put me beyond the reach of all pain, all sorrow, all death, emotional, physical pain, or anything like that. And I will be able to enjoy perpetual happiness forever. And so when I look around at things in this world, I don't look at it with the same level of anxiety or fear, or with sort of a doomsday mentality, because I know everything's going to be okay. And that is what gives me peace. You know, um, the Apostle Paul, I don't know if he was a therapist by trade, but he might as well have been, because some of the things that he talked about were very interesting, um, therapeutic, concepts, right? Psychological concepts. In the book of Philippians, chapter 4, the Apostle Paul says something very interesting. He says, rejoice in the Lord, in verse 4, always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. So what does he mean by that? Be careful for nothing. In other words, he's saying, don't worry. Don't trip. God has got this. Don't worry about what's going on around you. Now, it's very interesting when you look at the life of Paul, for him to be able to say that, because Paul had been through some stuff. There ain't a whole lot of people who have ever been through the type of stuff that Paul has been through. Paul experienced it all. I mean, the man was stoned. The man was beaten with 39 stripes, 40 stripes save one, twice. He was shipwrecked 3 times, on the run, fleeing for his life from Gentiles, fleeing for his life from his own Jewish brethren. Paul experienced it all. Experienced starvation, nakedness, famine, you name it. Eventually, Paul experienced the jail cell, and ultimately, Paul experienced death. And yet he can still say something like this: don't worry about anything. Be careful for nothing. But in everything, by prayer and supplication and with thanksgiving. See, that's the key. You know what the antidote for worry is, and anxiety? Is to count your blessings and not your problems. Why is Thanksgiving such an important antidote to worry? I know a lot of people that worry when things aren't going right around them, when this isn't happening or that's not happening, or they don't have this thing that they think is important to them, or whatever it may be. And I always tell them, okay, I hear you and I understand, but what is going right around you? What is going right around you? And you know, it's so much easier for somebody to do an inventory. I mean, people can reel off a long litany of things that aren't going right very easily. Oh, this is not going right, and that's not going right, and this is not going right, and that's not going right. But when you ask them what is going right, uh, well, and when you look at somebody's life a little bit more objectively, sort of from the outside looking in, you can say, well, you have a nice job. Yeah, that's true. You have a nice family. Yeah, that's true. You have a car that works. Yes. You have your health. Yes. And even if you had none of those things, if all you could say was that you have breath in your nostrils and that your heart is beating and pumping blood, you are rich. There are many people who are fabulously wealthy, have more money than anyone could imagine, and would give up all that wealth if they could just have a healthy and strong body again, because your health is your wealth. But if you have that and all these other things, you are more blessed than most people in the world. And yet, here we are in one of the richest countries, if not the richest country in the world, and we are full of anxiety and depression. And there are people in third world countries with very little who are happy. How is that possible? Because they count their blessings and not their problems. What Paul was saying here was a very important tactic to help us get past the anxiety that we feel living in a crazy time like this. He also says this that's very interesting. And again, this is psychology, right? You can look at psychological principles and concepts that are taught and studied, and they coincide with what he says here perfectly. Listen to what he says. He says in verse 7, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. So he says, when you don't worry and instead have an attitude of gratitude and give thanks to God for everything that you have, the result will be that you'll have this strange peace that even in the midst of a storm, you can be calm. You know, there's this story in the Bible about Jesus being asleep in the back of a boat while they're on the Lake of Galilee in the middle of this terrible storm. And you have these seasoned fishermen who are so frightened because they've never seen a storm like this that they think they're about to die. And they go and find Jesus, and he's asleep on the back of the boat. And they say, Master, don't you care that we're about to die? And Jesus just got up, peace be still. The wind stopped, the rain stopped, and the waves calmed down to a point where it was probably like a nice, calm, moonlit summer night. And he said, what did you worry for, O ye of little faith? Right? How could he say that? He had a peace that passed understanding because he knew that no matter what happened, he would be okay because Jesus skipped to the end of the book. Jesus knew what the end was going to be like for the people of God. Jesus knew that no matter what he experienced in this world, that ultimately he was going to one day be okay. And that's the lesson for all of us. And this is what I try to share to some of my friends who are non-believers, or maybe they are believers, but they're so shackled by anxiety that they're not focused on these powerful truths that are so hope filled, and they don't understand. You know, this is what I try to share with them, you know, because it gives me peace. You know, and it continues and it says, Paul says this, he says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. You know, it's very interesting because what he was talking about really was something that they talk about in psychology called cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive reframing, right? Instead of looking at a situation and looking at your life in the worst way possible, let's reframe this experience. Let's reframe this difficulty that you're going through. Let's reframe, the way that you look at your own life, and let's count your blessings and not your problems. So really what Paul was giving us was the secret to have peace no matter what. So you can have peace by counting your blessings, not your problems. You can have peace by not worrying and instead casting those worries upon somebody whose shoulders are far larger than ours to bear that burden. And you can have peace by skipping to the end of the book. Because like I said before, the end of the book says, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, no crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Now, some people might say, well, I don't believe that. I think that's baloney. And that's fair. Um, Jesus was very patient with people who didn't believe. He asked a lot of those who believed in him, but he didn't ask much of those who did not. He was very patient with them, and he understood. So, when people say, I don't believe that, or I'm skeptical, I say, that's fine. That's fine. But I also look at it like this. If I choose to not believe these promises and these truths, what do I have in store? I have nothing but worry in store. If I choose to believe these promises, I can go through the same experiences, but I can do it with a certain level of hope that will give me peace no matter what. So, really, what have you got to lose? That's how I look at it. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know. Let's say some of my unbelieving, atheist friends, maybe they're right. Okay. So, you know, I didn't kill anybody. I didn't steal from anybody. I didn't, steal anybody's wife, or maybe I missed a few parties, and, I didn't do drugs, uh, anything like that. Generally lived a good life. And then I went and I died and I turned into fertilizer, right? I mean, what's the worst I can? I lived a good life. I was good to other people, and then I went to my grave. But if I'm right, and I believe that I am, then my atheist friends, my non-believing friends, have missed out on not only the ability to live a life free of anxiety and free of depression and worry and all these things, but they've missed out on eternal life. So I'm not a gambling man, but if I'm looking at the odds, I'm betting on God. Because I feel like I have far more to gain by betting on God than choosing to not believe these promises. So when I skip to the end of the book, it helps me enjoy the journey of life far more and with far less anxiety. Because what happens um, with excessive worry? Um, you know, Chronic worrying not only affects you mentally and emotionally and your ability to enjoy your life and enjoy others around you, but it affects your physical body because the body keeps score. There's actually a book with that title, The Body Keeps Score. What's happening in here will manifest itself in your physical body. If you don't feel good, if you're sad, what happens? Your shoulders slump, your head hangs, your eyes droop, because your body is literally manifesting what you're feeling in your heart, right? If you're happy, you're exuberant, you open up, your eyes open, you're smiling, right? Because the body is a manifest, it will manifest what you're feeling inside here and here. In fact, my favorite author outside of the Bible said this. They said 9/10 of all diseases have their origin in the mind. And there's another doctor who I've mentioned before, Dr. Lissa Rankin, who has a book called Mind Over Medicine. And she talks about how the mind, when it's in, a state of peace, it kicks in something called the relaxation response. And the parasympathetic nervous system activates all these self-healing mechanisms that God designed in us to keep the body healthy and strong. But when the mind is full of worry and fear and anxiety for not knowing what's going to happen because you didn't skip to the end of the book and find out, um, you end up with being in a stress response and in a fight or flight sort of state constantly throughout the day. And what that does is it activates the sympathetic nervous system, which shuts down all of the unnecessary functions of the body because you're just trying to survive, and you end up being in a less healthy state because the body's natural self-healing mechanisms are shut down. That's what worry does. Chronic worrying affects your appetite, your lifestyle habits, your relationships, your sleep, your job performance. Um, and, a lot of people who are really sort of anxiety ridden are going to seek relief in harmful lifestyles and harmful lifestyle habits like overeating, cigarette smoking, using alcohol, using drugs, promiscuity, you name it, right? Because they're trying to get a little dopamine hit to help them just get through the pain. They're trying to numb the pain. They're trying to self-medicate. So when you see people who are struggling with addiction, they're not just doing this because they're bad people or because they want to cause pain to others. Um, they're doing it mostly because they're trying to numb some sort of pain. They're hurting, and oftentimes it's connected to something called toxic shame, but that's another talk for another time. But really, I mean, just worry is just not something that is going to benefit you or help you at all. And it's certainly, if you're a Christian, you have to understand this one thing. You can have worry or you can have faith in God, but you can't have both. They are mutually exclusive. You can have trust in God or you can have doubt and fear, but you can't have both. You see, in a dark room, as soon as I turn the light on, it dispels the darkness. In a heart and mind full of faith, it dispels fear and doubt. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to make the decision to have faith in God and it's going to be like flipping on a light switch and you're going to be done. Because if the mind has been conditioned to be anxiety ridden, to worry, to fear the minute something doesn't go right, or the minute there's some unsurety about what's going on in life, that's going to be a natural reaction. So you have to take steps in order to fight that, to combat that. It's going to be at times almost like a physical fight in trying to curb these natural inclinations of the mind to go to worry, right? But it's important that you do, lest there be found in you an evil heart of unbelief, right? Like Paul says. And so what I tell people is, here's what you have to do. There's several steps. The first step is you have to acknowledge the fact that you are feeling afraid, that you're feeling anxious, anxiety, that you're feeling worry, whatever it may be, you're feeling something like this. You have to acknowledge it. So becoming aware of that and acknowledging that you're feeling this is important. And it's important that you ask yourself, what am I feeling? And you name it, because they say if you name it, you can tame it, right? So, okay, I'm feeling worry. The next thing you have to do is you have to ask yourself, why am I feeling this feeling? I'm feeling worried because I'm worried that with what's going on in the Ukraine right now, that could end up leading to possible nuclear war on the continental U.S. And for the first time ever, we could see a war with a foreign country on our soil. Okay, now then the next thing you have to ask yourself is that a rational thought? You know, well, at the moment, there's nothing going on here. There's no imminent threat here. Um, there's no reason to believe that, at least in this very moment, that anything like that is going to happen. So really, it's kind of an irrational thought. And so what you have to ask yourself after that is, what am I going to do about it? So once you've named the feeling and then you figured out why you feel this way, then you have to ask yourself, is this a rational or irrational thought? Most of the time, when we're feeling a negative emotion like fear or worry or anxiety or something like that, it's driven by an irrational thought. So the next thing that we have to do after that is we have to ask ourselves, how am I going to deal with this? And then we make a choice. Either I'm going to let this fearful, irrational thought go on loop in my mind forever and take me on this downward spiral all the way into misery and ultimately depression. And then in some cases, people become so depressed and miserable that they end up taking their own lives, right? This constant downward spiral, it usually doesn't end well. It either ends in something horrible like that, or maybe addiction or broken relationships or whatever. Or I can skip to the end of the book and read this part here where it says, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, no more pain, no more sorrow, nor crying, for the former things are passed away. And I could say, you know what? I'm going to claim that promise. I'm going to hang on to that promise, and I'm going to derive hope from that promise so that I can have what Paul talks about, the peace that passes understanding. And so that I could go on throughout my life, regardless of what's going on around me, and enjoy it and smile and be able to enjoy the blessings, big or small, that are in my life. Because worry really does nothing but it steals your time. It makes you stagnant. It causes this weird like emotional paralysis that prevents you from coming up with actual solutions to your problems. I mean, I always tell my wife, I say, don't borrow trouble. We don't know what's going to happen. God could be, there could be a blessing right around the corner, and we're sitting here worrying, what's going to happen? And, how does that make God feel? I mean, can you imagine if our children got up every day and cried and worried because they weren't sure if we were going to bathe, clothe, and feed them? That would break our hearts. So how do we think God feels when we, as His children, get up and worry and fret every day? It doesn't make any sense, And rather than expend this emotional energy worrying, what I tell people um, expend that energy finding solutions, because more often than not, this very ominous thing that we think is going to happen is not it's not going to affect us in the way that we think it is, if at all. And then we've just spent all this time worrying and fretting for nothing, for nothing. And it's silly. It's just silly. Um, all that time could be better spent, you know, um, focusing on other things. And in fact, Jesus, he kind of said that, in the Sermon on the Mount, which I recommend for anybody, whether you are atheist, skeptic, you know, Christian, or maybe you kind of lukewarm or whatever, read the Sermon on the Mount. That is one of the greatest writings, if not the greatest writing in the history of mankind, in my opinion. But one of the things he said in chapter 6 was, he said in verse um, 25, therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body more than raiment? He says, which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit to his stature? And why take ye thought for your raiment? It's very interesting. And so um, he says, wherefore if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall ye drink, or wherewithal shall ye be clothed? For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So in other words, what Jesus is saying is, those in the world who have no connection to God, they're worried every day about where their next meal is going to come from, how they're going to survive, how they're going to be happy, how they're going to thrive. They live in a constant state of worry. But you, as somebody who is a child of God,
doesn't have to worry about that, because ultimately God is going to take care of your needs no matter what. And for those who are in the world who have not had a connection with God, Jesus is saying, you can have that. You can experience that. You know, in history, we study about the martyrs. And in the Roman Empire, the Christians were just absolutely savagely murdered in the Colosseums and, things like that. They died many horrible deaths. And what people don't realize is that when these people died, they died singing hymns. They died with a smile on their face. They died with courage, knowing that their very next thought was going to be to see the face of Christ in heaven. That's what they believed. And when these non-believers, these non-Christians saw that dignity, they saw that power, they saw that peace that they had, that they could stare death in the face and not care, that they could do it with a smile, that they could die singing hymns. They said, whatever that is, I want that. Whatever it is, I want that. Because they lived in a constant state of fear. And so they wanted that. And in fact, there was one quote in Fox's book of Martyrs where it said, the blood of the martyrs is seed, right? So they would murder you know, one Christian, and in his wake, in his place, would rise 100 Christians who would want that peace, and there was nothing that they could do about it. And that is because when you have the peace of God that passes all understanding, and people pick up on that, eventually they say, "Man, whatever you got, I want that." you know, um, you ever see somebody who is in really good shape and always takes good care of themselves, and maybe you're struggling to just to you know to keep it together, and you say, hey man, what do you do, like what is it that you're doing to stay in such good shape? And they say, well, I work out and I do this and I do that. I said, wow, you know what? Whatever you are doing, I want to do that too, because I want to be able to look like you and to feel like you and to be in shape like you. Well, when as Christians, one of the greatest witnesses that we could have is to go around and show the peace that passes understanding, regardless. I mean, the world could be falling apart all around us, but if we can smile and we can have peace and we can trust in God, that is a greater witness than anything that we could say. That is a greater witness than anything that we could teach them about the Bible. You know what? I have a lot of, people that are excited about like giving Bible studies and stuff. Like the first thing they want to do is they want to start with prophecy and get into Daniel chapter 2. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Teach them about Jesus first. Teach them about Jesus first. And teach them about the peace that we could have through a connection with God. Those two things are going to be far more powerful than knowing, what this metal man, what the belly and thighs of brass and the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay. Like that's very interesting, and it is very powerful. Prophecy is powerful. But man, if they see you living your faith by the way you handle difficulty and the way you experience trials and tribulations, and you can do it with a smile on your face and with the peace of God in your heart, that is a more powerful witness than anything that you could ever do. And so, what I tell my non-believing friends is that, it makes no sense to worry, because, things, especially things that you don't have any control over, because there's nothing you can do about them. So why worry about things that you can't control? It really just, the activity of worrying just kind of keeps you immobilized. And a William Ralph Inge, he said worry was interest paid on a bill before it comes due. And that doesn't make any sense now, does it, right? Not only that, but we talked about worrying still your faith. Martin Luther said, pray and let God worry. That's his job, right? One of my favorite authors said, Satan is exultant when he can lead the children of God into unbelief and despondency. Why? Because not only is that faith breaking a connection with God, because you can have fear or you can have faith, but you can't have both, but you will worry yourself right out of the arms of Jesus. And then on top of that, you will show a witness to people, oh, you go to church, you believe in God, but the minute something bad happens, you are worried just like anybody else. What do I need that for? What they want is when they see that peace. How can you be calm in this situation? How can you have peace in a situation like this? How can you be okay in a situation like this? And you can say, because I skipped to the end of the book. Because I went to the end of the book. And the end of the book said, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, neither crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. So, yes, it's very interesting, the correlation between this psychological phenomenon of people skipping to the end of the book to have more peace in their life, but it also correlates to real life. When you skip to the end of the Bible and you see that God wins, Satan loses, and that one day we're never going to experience tears or death or sorrow or crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. That is something that we can hold on to in faith, regardless of what is happening. And that's a powerful witness to anyone we come in contact with, especially those who are out in the world, because right now, the world is becoming a very scary place. There are wars that are beginning to rage around us, and there are very wicked people in positions of power who want to enslave us in every way possible. And so, how do you deal with that? Well, you skip to the end of the book. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed that. And I hope that, you will skip to the end of the book and see the same things I see. And I hope that if you are somebody who is an unbeliever or non-Christian, or maybe you just, stepped away for a little bit and are trying to find your way back, I hope you will skip to the end of the book and see that this is a promise that you can bet on, because we really have nothing to lose. And this gives us everything to gain. Take care, folks.